to the next edition of the DK Down Under Show, presented by dailyfantasyrankings.com.au, your number one free AFL source for all things AFL Daily Fantasy. I'm Smatho 10, and next to me is Big Hef here, and we are going to look at Collingwood versus Hawthorn on Friday Night Footy, round 6 in the AFL. Before we get stuck in the game, how are you, Hef?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to this one. I'm with the underdog, Hawthorn. I think they can bounce back here against Collingwood. Beaten them the last 3 times the two teams have played, and I'm really interested to see what Tom Mitchell does. But we'll get to that a bit later.
Jeez, that's a very, very controversial stance straight off the top of the show after Hawthorn getting absolutely beaten down by the Giants last week. So on paper, it does look like an easy Magpies fantasy-wise game here, but we'll get stuck into this particular game itself. As always, make sure you get to rotogrinders.com for all of your AFL DraftKings content and links to dailyfantasyrankings.com for our cheat sheets and free AFL projections. Our content here is always free. We've always got the YouTube videos up, so make sure you subscribe to our channel as well. So let's have a look at this game. So the Magpies are actually favourites at minus 160 with the Hawks at plus 120. The line is currently around 6.5 as well at a total of 121.5. We are playing this game at Giants Stadium in Sydney. So these are two Melbourne teams. They've been relocated out of town due to the pandemic situation and playing on neutral territory. In team news, there's a couple of injuries for the Hawks. They lost a couple of young guys in Mitch Lewis and Jack Scrimshaw. For Collingwood, Jordan De Goey, who's one of their live wire forward / midfielders, he's actually out due to a, police incident that required him to extricate himself out of the COVID bubble, so he can't play. Collingwood today actually announced that young rookie forward Will Kelly will get a debut, and there's talk today that Braden Sear, who's a midfielder, big body midfielder at $3,000, could also be in line to be selected for the Pie. So make sure you keep an eye on team sheets there 24 hours prior to the game. At the time of recording, we don't know these team sheets, so if we name any players that are not playing, well, oh well.
Don't play them.
Yeah. Don't blame DraftKings, just don't play. All right, so as we do here on the show, we get Hef here to break down each position on our DraftKings lineup here, and we always start with the Rucks. And as the theme for the last couple of weeks now, on a Friday, we have Collingwood, and therefore we have Brodie Grundy. This week we find him at 9,300, but we got him going against a couple of seasoned ruckmen here for Hawthorn, which are John O'Siegler at 6,1 and Ben McAvoy at 4,500. McAvoy actually attended some ruck contest last week, which threw a lot of fantasy owners last week, considering he's been playing in defence. So we're not too sure what's going to happen this week. Is he going to play a ruck, or is he just going to go back in defence and burn a lot of owners? All right, Hef, let's get you in here. I've been talking too much. Who are you looking for in the rucks? Is it just Grundy and move on, or there's a merit here for the Hawks?
Yeah, well, everyone around the world, I think, by now knows Brodie Grundy is basically the GOAT of ruckman in the comp at the moment. Ben McAvoy is the one I want to talk about. A bit of background for those who may not be aware, but he was the number one ruck for many years for Hawthorn, and this year they decided to play him as a defender and let John O'Siegler in the ruck until last week, whether it was a combination of McAvoy being hopeless down back or Siegler being disappointed in the ruck. I don't know what it was, but the master coach, Alistair Clarkson, threw McAvoy into the ruck for about 50% of the centre bounces, and he responded with a really big fantasy score, Ben McAvoy. Looking at it this week, we don't know if he's going to do that again or he's going to stick to his guns and put him back into the back line. Worth noting last year that McAvoy went up against Grundy. Grundy got his 100 like he usually does, but McAvoy got 80 going back at him. So if they were to do a battle again this week and there was only 20 points difference, you don't need me to tell you that the 4,500 for Ben McAvoy is a much better play than the 9,300 for Brodie Grundy. One more point in favour of Ben McAvoy is the fact that Collingwood do give up points to defenders. So if you play Ben McAvoy in the hope that he rucks and he plays down back, all is not totally lost. There is a chance that he could still make value as a defender. Have I sold you on McAvoy, Smatho?
You've done a good sell. That defensive stat does get me a little bit excited. At
Yeah,
4,500. Yeah, that's actually not too bad. Not too
that's a
bad.
get out of jail free card, but Grundy's the best, so
All right, well
he's expensive, but
let's put him in the team then. 9,300
no,
salary.
put
Oh
McAvoy.
no!
Put McAvoy in. But if you want to play Grundy, he's the best. How can I tell you not to play Grundy? Put McAvoy in.
Let's put McAvoy in. Back the truck
Yeah.
up. All right.
Let's have a go.
All right, let's move on to defence then. And yeah, look, the stats on the DFAR site really make it quite clear that you need to play Magpie defenders here. Hawthorn had a shocker last week against the Giants. Giants just absolutely killed him down back playing that chippy ball, that +6 game. Collingwood love playing that chippy +6 game as well. Let's talk about correlations and stacking of defenders here for the Magpies. Don't really worry about the Hawks, I don't think.
We'll come back to the Hawks, but yeah, there's a lot on offer here, and there's a lot of cheap guys on offer for Collingwood as well. Interesting couple of points. Hawthorn, not only do they give up points to defenders, but it's the tall defenders. I have a theory that they leave open the gangly ones that don't kick very well, and they let them get the ball on purpose, and that's why we see some of these low-scoring defenders have their best game for the year against Hawthorn. Darcy Moore at 4,700. His last two games against Hawthorn, he scored 90-odd and 80-odd.
Ooh.
So that's a great stat. A few other guys fit the bill. Scharenberg at 3,900. We saw him return to the team last week. He's actually a really good player who's been cruelled by injuries over his career. He's definitely in play. Even a guy like Jordan Roughhead, who's only 3,000, he fits the bill of a big, tall, gangly defender who can show up against Hawthorn. Don't totally write off Hawthorn here. There's one guy in particular that I want to highlight is James Sicily, 5,500. This guy's got massive upside. He might be able to be freed up with the smaller than usual Collingwood forward line. He had 120 and I think it was 90 his last two games against Collingwood. He is definitely in play. Don't sleep on him. But yeah, we've got some options in the midfield that we can group if we want to play all Collingwood defenders.
Just one more before we move on. Possibly the trap play. Sean Burgoyne. Have you seen his salary? Sean Burgoyne? 3,400. Last week only scored 26 points in a pretty much a dreadful performance, but did score 70 against North Melbourne in round 4. I mean, if you can land somewhere in the middle of that, would that be okay?
Yeah, that price, 50 would be a good result for Burgoyne. He has been able to do it this year. He's also thrown in two definite stinkers. Not only did he have that 26, he had another 27 earlier in the year. Very old player, Sean Burgoyne, got unbelievable talent, but he's slowing down. I wouldn't say not to play him at that price, but I'm not gagging over it like I would have been 12 months ago.
I must admit, if he's not actually named in the team, though, there's actually a better way to go about it. If he's not named due to form or having a rest or something, that could be a good way to get away from that because, yeah, you want the Pies here in this position. All right, let's move on to the midfield. Last week on the show, we talked about Taylor Adams correlating with Treloar. Treloar was the player last week. He got the 100, whereas Adams was okay, got that 70-odd. The prices are now come towards a bit closer now. So do we do this again? Do we fade the Adams and go back to Treloar? Or is there any other options for the Magpies here, considering they're going to be well on top of the Hawks midfield?
Well, my opinion is the only way you would want to play Adams over Treloar is from an ownership sort of theory. Treloar, I think Adams was probably suited last week in the wet. Won't get it as wet this week. Treloar just looks the better play to me at the cheaper price. Pendlebury's always in play. 7,500 is pretty reasonable for a guy of his quality, with still Sidebottom still out of the team who can take fantasy points away. Let's talk about Hawthorn. Let's talk about Tom Mitchell for maybe some of our overseas viewers who would be oblivious to the fact that Tom Mitchell was just an absolute fantasy beast leading into this year. He had a terrible broken leg, was it, Smatho?
Yeah, broken leg in preseason in 2019. He was like the Christian McCaffrey of the AFL. He was just, no matter where you put him, what games he play, especially against the Magpies. Tell us about how he goes against the Magpies.
Yeah, there's an infamous game in 2017, he just had a million possessions, and the Collingwood coach said he doesn't care how much Mitchell gets of the ball. The knock on Mitchell is that when he gets the ball, he's not a huge long kick or a great kick. He just accumulates rather than damages, some may say. 2018, he had 54 possessions. Collingwood still said they didn't care too much, but Hawthorn have been winning these games. He comes in here at 6,700 now. If you look at his scores this year, that's you wouldn't be getting too excited, but if Collingwood let him run free, the history is there. Every single game he comes back, Mitchell, he's got to be getting more confidence in that leg. He's definitely in play.
Excellent. All right, let's look at some cheap options then. Let's start with the Magpies. Tom Phillips, Rupert Wheels around that 5K. I'm going down. Tyler Brown at 3-3, maybe if you're looking for a fourth midfielder at that cheap price. But it's the same guys again for the Magpies, the Mains, the Phillipses and the Wheels. There's also a guy here that I did say earlier who might possibly get a game. Ignore him if he doesn't. Braden Sire, S-I-E-R, at $3,000. Tell us a little about Braden.
Well, he's a genuine midfielder, Sire. He's an in and under type guy. I'm trying to wonder who they're going to bring him in for when they've got Adams and Treloar there in the middle. Maybe they're looking to replace Jordan De Goey's centre bounces that he's been taking this season. We look at last year's, he hasn't played this year, obviously, Sire. He averaged 50 last year. The year before, he was quite impressive in his first year in the comp. He averaged around 75. 3,000 if he does play. We said we were trying to stay away from Simpson in the Geelong game. So I would be much more inclined to be playing him at 3,000. A few other points on Collingwood. Tom Phillips has got massive upside, but he's very volatile at the moment. He's playing a bit of a different role. He did have 100 a few weeks ago, so 5,200 is he's definitely in GPP calculations. Chris Mayne at 4,700. He's a guy that I love playing when I want to stack my Collingwood backline, as he tends to. He's playing a half-back role at the moment. So if they do chip the ball around the back line, a lot of mark and kicks, putting Mayne with your Collingwood defenders is probably a good move.
All right, let's move on the forwards. And being the Pies being warm favourites here, there are some really good, some cheap options here. Contrarian players are everywhere, wherever you look. Anyone that stands out here in the forward line?
Collingwood always have these guys that we sort of rotate through, and one of them's going to pop off for an 80 or a 90 all around a similar price. I'm talking Will Hoskin-Elliott at 4,600. I'm talking Jamie Elliott all the way down at 3,600. That's really enticing. He's
getting CBAs too.
He has been, yeah. Maybe lost out on him a bit last week off the top of my head, but the week before he had about 10, and now to go he's not there. 3,600, he has potential to go. Wow, he can go over 20 times his salary if he gets going, Jamie Elliott. So he's one that immediately stood out to me. Myercheck is a guy who can bob up with a really big slate-breaking score at 4,300. So there's heaps of cheap options here for Collingwood. They don't. It's a matter of picking one usually. Stephenson is the other one. 5,500 is pretty reasonably priced for him coming off an 80, and he's a first quarter specialist for sure.
Now, I did mention about the new player, Will Kelly. He's currently at 2,800. Unfortunately, he's not that fantasy relevant in the minor leagues in the VFL, which is the Victorian Football Leagues in 2019. He only actually averaged around 25 fantasy points out of 4 or 5 games. Might bob up for a goal and a couple of tackles, and that's about it. So I wouldn't be going too crazy on Kelly. And just keep an eye out on Hawthorn's team selection. They might actually bring in Jonathan Patton, the general as they call him. He's at 3,100. So if you're looking at very contrarian, Hawks winning by 7, 8, 10 goals and really put the Magpies into dire straits, I reckon Patton is a very, very sneaky player there as well.
Patton is, and if you are on the Hawthorn wagon, like I sort of am, Jack Gunston, 4,900. He was really good actually last week in a really disappointing team performance against GWS. He's a mobile forward, and he does have quite a high ceiling. So 4,900 is I would have thought Gunston would have been much cheaper than that ever in his in the last few years.
And Chad Wingard at 7,100, always playing him in the forward line, always open up that midfield spot if you can. All right, Hef, so you did stake the flag in the Hawthorn camp, and as you went along the show, you did talk about Collingwood that much. Are you still sticking by that in your last thoughts on this particular game?
Well, that's the thing about DFS. I could be tipping a Hawthorn win, but we've seen Collingwood rack up the fantasy points even when they lose. So I don't think it's necessarily a case of just all Collingwood stacks, because I don't think they're necessarily going to win the game. But I can definitely see the case for possibly playing Collingwood defenders and midfielders, but Hawthorn bobbing up with a forward and big boy McAvoy to take us to DFS glory.
Let's go, the big boy. All right. Hef, thanks for your thoughts today for this particular match, the Pies and the Hawks for Friday night. Make sure you get to rotorunners.com, to YouTube, subscribe to the channel, and more importantly, get to dailyfantasyrankings.com.au for all of our AFL content for Daily Fantasy. Hef and I are back for the next edition of the DK Down Under show. We might have some special guests coming up on the show coming up, Hef. So
very special. I haven't even heard about these.
No, very special. He's bought the makeup lights today, so and I've seen the microphone cradle ready to go. So look out for the next edition of the DK Down Under show. Thanks, Hef, for joining me.
Thank you, mate. Great teaser. See you next week.
See you then.